The rain fell in relentless sheets, drowning the cobblestone streets of Blackwater Cove as Constable Elias Holt stumbled uphill, his boots sinking into the mud. The lone street lamp flickered like a dying heartbeat, casting jagged shadows over the body sprawled at the edge of the pier. A woman in a crimson dress lay face up, her pale skin glistening under the fractured light. Her lips were stained the color of wine, or blood. Elias knelt, his breath catching. Margaret Voss. The mayor's wife. Her throat had been slit with surgical precision, a single clean cut that spoke of a killer who knew exactly what they were doing. Clutched in her stiffening hand was a faded photograph, the face of a young man scratched out, and on the back, a single word, guilty. By dawn, the town was alive with whispers. Blackwater Cove hadn't seen a murder in 37 years. Nestled between jagged cliffs and the roaring Atlantic, it was a place where secrets festered like open wounds, where the past clung to the present like the salt on the wind. The mayor's wife, the woman who hosted charity galas and smiled from newspaper headlines, was dead. And the photograph in her hand suggested this wasn't a random act of violence, it was personal. Detective Lila Grayson arrived by ferry at noon, her sharp green eyes scanning the crowd gathered at the dock. She'd been sent to Blackwater Cove after a scandal in Boston, a case that had unraveled in her hands like a threadbare rope. But this was different. The air here reeked of salt and lies. Her first stop was the Voss Mansion, a Gothic monstrosity perched atop Widow's Hill. Mayor Thomas Voss greeted her at the door, his tailored suit immaculate, his smile colder than the sea breeze. "Find my wife's killer," he said, pressing a check into her palm, the number of zeros making her jaw tighten. "But tread lightly. This town, it doesn't forgive easily." Lila began her investigation at the pier, retracing Elias's steps. The crimson dress, the slashed throat, the photograph, each detail gnawed at her. Margaret's life, she soon learned, was a tapestry of contradictions. To the town, she was the perfect politician's wife, elegant, charitable, untouchable. But whispers hinted at a darker truth. Margaret had been seen arguing with Henry Cole, a gruff fisherman with a temper and a history of violence. Days before her death, their shouting match at the docks had drawn a crowd. "You don't know what you're messing with," Henry had roared, his fists clenched. Then there was Dr. Clara Reed, the town's reclusive pathologist. Clara had returned to Blackwater Cove after her father's mysterious suicide, and rumors swirled that Margaret had threatened to expose her role in covering up his overdose. Clara's clinic, a crumbling Victorian house on the edge of town, reeked of antiseptic and regret. When Lila questioned her, Clara's hands trembled, but her voice was steady. Margaret was a troubled woman, she said. She saw darkness everywhere. Even where there was none. The list of suspects grew. Ethan Blake, the mayor's estranged nephew, had been banned from the Voss estate after demanding his inheritance. His alibi, a night spent drinking at the docks, crumbled when witnesses admitted they'd only seen him after midnight. Then there was Father Patrick O'Malley, the town priest, spotted burning documents in the churchyard the night of the murder. When Lila confronted him, he crossed himself and said, "Some sins are better left buried." But the real breakthrough came when Lila discovered Margaret's secret journal, tucked inside a hollowed-out Bible in the town library. The entries were frantic, obsessive. Margaret had been investigating the disappearance of Sophie Marlowe, a teenager who'd vanished in 1987. Sophie's diary, found by Margaret, mentioned a circle of men in suits and a cave where the screams echo. The final entry read, "They're watching. They're always watching." Lila's search for answers led her to old Maggie, a half-mad woman living in a shack deep in the woods. The townsfolk avoided her, but Lila found her hunched over a fire, muttering to the flames. "They'll kill you too," Maggie rasped, grabbing Lila's sleeve with a bony hand. "The cave, the mayor, the syndicate, they're one and the same." She thrust a rusted key into Lila's palm. "Beneath the church. Where the water meets the stone. That night, Lila crept into the church basement, the key trembling in her hand. The lock clicked, revealing a hidden passage sloping downward, the air thick with the smell of seawater and decay. Her flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating symbols carved into the walls, strange, twisted faces, hands clasped in prayer. The tunnel ended at a cavern, where the sound of waves crashing echoed like distant thunder. And there, chained to the wall, was a skeleton, its bones wrapped in the tattered remains of a dress. A locket around its neck bore the initials SM. The pieces fell into place. Sophie Marlowe hadn't run away. She'd been murdered, her body hidden by the Syndicate, a group of powerful men, including the mayor's father, who'd preyed on the town's vulnerable for decades. Margaret had uncovered the truth, and they'd silenced her. But who among them had struck the final blow? Lila confronted Mayor Voss in his study, the rain pounding against the windows. "You knew about the cave," she said. "About Sophie. About all of it." Voss's smile didn't waver. "You think this is about me?" he said. "This town, it's a living thing. It requires sacrifice." He reached into his desk, but Lila was faster. The gunshot echoed like a clap of thunder. In the end, the truth spilled out like blood. Henry Cole had been paid to keep silent about the cave. Clara Reed had falsified records to hide the Syndicate's crimes. Father O'Malley had blessed their sins. And Ethan Blake, desperate for money, had sold Margaret's name to the highest bidder. But the killer. The killer was the one person Lila hadn't suspected. Old Maggie. The madwoman in the woods. Sophie Marlowe's mother. She'd waited decades for revenge, manipulating Lila like a pawn. "You see," Maggie whispered as the police dragged her away, "the Syndicate isn't gone. It's in the blood. In the water. And it's hungry." The town of Blackwater Cove buried its secrets once more, the waves swallowing the evidence, the rain washing away the blood. But Lila Grayson knew the truth. Some stories don't end. They just wait for the next storm. Lila hadn't come to Blackwater Cove by accident. 6 months earlier, she'd been poring over cold case files in Boston, her career in shambles after a suspect she'd cleared was later tied to a string of murders. The department had shipped her off to the coast, calling it a sabbatical. But she'd known better. They were burying her, just like they'd buried the truth about her sister. Now, staring at the photograph Voss had slid across the desk. A grainy image of her own face, circled in red. Beneath it, a date, October 12, 1993. The night her sister had disappeared. The gunshot echoed through the mayor's study, the bullet lodging itself in the oak paneling inches from Thomas Voss's head. Lila stood trembling, the revolver smoking in her hand. Voss hadn't flinched. His smile hadn't wavered. "You think this is about me?" he repeated, leaning back in his chair. "This town, it's a living thing. It requires sacrifice." But Lila wasn't listening. Her eyes were fixed on the photograph Voss had slid across the desk, a grainy image of her own face, circled in red. Beneath it, a date, October 12, 1993. The night her sister, Mara, had vanished. Voss lit a cigar, the smoke curling like a ghost. "The Syndicate has branches everywhere, Detective. Even in Boston. Especially in Boston." He exhaled slowly. "Your sister," she asked too many questions. "Just like Margaret. Just like you." Lila's vision blurred. She fired again, but Voss was ready. The bullet tore through his shoulder, and he laughed, blood blooming across his white shirt. "You're too late," he hissed. "The tide's coming in." Henry Cole was waiting for her when she fled the mansion, his fishing knife glinting in the moonlight. "You shouldn't have come here," he growled, blocking her path. But Lila wasn't in the mood for games. She lunged, disarming him with a move she'd learned in juvie. Henry hit the ground hard, cursing. I didn't kill her, he spat. But I knew who did. Margaret, she found the ledger. The names. All the girls they took. Sophie Marlowe. Your sister. Dozens more. Lila froze. What ledger? The one in the cave, Henry said, clutching his bleeding arm. Beneath the church. But it's gone now. They flooded the tunnels. After you showed up asking questions. He nodded toward the cliffs. They're cleaning house, detective. And you're next. Clara Reed was in the clinic, sterilizing instruments with shaking hands. When Lila burst in, she didn't look up. You shouldn't be here, she murmured. They're watching. Who's they? Lila demanded. Clara's eyes met hers, haunted. My father. The mayor's father. The fishermen. The priests. They called themselves the syndicate. They took girls. For years. Sophie Marlowe was the first. They dumped her in the cave. Made it look like a drowning. But Margaret found her locket. She threatened to expose them all. And you helped cover it up. Clara's laugh was bitter. I had no choice. They threatened to take my daughter. Just like they took Sophie. Just like they took, she trailed off, tears streaming down her face. The night Margaret died, I was supposed to meet her. To hand over the evidence. But I couldn't. I was too afraid. Lila's heart raced. What evidence? A list. Names. Dates. Buried in my father's coffin. But when I went to retrieve it, it was gone. Father O'Malley was in the confessional when Lila found him, the scent of incense thick as smoke. Bless me, Father, she said, her voice trembling. For I have sinned. The partition slid open. The priest's eyes were hollow. You're not the one who needs forgiveness, he said. The syndicate, they're not just men. They're a curse. A pact made in blood. To protect the town. To keep the darkness at bay. What darkness? The caves, he whispered. The things that come from the sea. The sacrifices. The girls, they weren't just killed. They were offered. Lila recoiled. Offered to what? But the priest was already closing the partition. You'll see, he said. When the tide comes in. The tunnels beneath the church were flooded, the water rising with every crash of the waves. Lila waded through the icy current, her flashlight flickering. The walls were lined with symbols, the same twisted faces she'd seen before. And then she heard it. A low, guttural hum, like voices chanting in a language she didn't recognize. The cavern opened before her, lit by the phosphorescent glow of algae. Dozens of skeletons littered the floor, their bones tangled in seaweed. And in the center, chained to an altar of black stone, was a figure in a tattered dress. Mara. But it wasn't her sister. It was old Maggie, her eyes wild, her voice a rasp. You shouldn't have come, she said. It's too late. The tide's coming. Above them, the ceiling cracked, seawater gushing in like a waterfall. And then Lila saw them, the shadows in the water, long and sinuous, with too many teeth. The mayor's voice crackled over the church's PA system, echoing through the tunnels. You see, detective, he said, Blackwater Cove requires a balance. A life for the sea. A soul for the darkness. Your sister's was the last, until you arrived. Lila fought the current, dragging Maggie toward higher ground. Why her? She screamed. Why Mara? Because she was chosen, Voss replied. Just like you. Just like Sophie. Just like all of them. The syndicate doesn't kill, detective. We offer. The water was waist deep now, the shadows closing in. Lila fumbled for her gun, but Maggie grabbed her wrist. "It's not him you need to fear," she hissed. "It's what's beneath the waves." And then the first tentacle emerged, slick and black, wrapping around Maggie's ankle. Lila fired blindly, the bullet tearing through the tentacle. Maggie screamed, clawing at the rocks as the thing in the water dragged her under. "Run!" she shrieked. "Tell them the truth." But Lila couldn't move. The water was rising, the symbols on the walls glowing brighter. And then she saw it, a massive eye, glowing amber, staring at her from the depths. The ceiling collapsed. They found Lila washed ashore at dawn, half dead, her skin etched with the symbols from the cave. The town declared her a hero, the mayor dead by suicide, the syndicate disbanded. But in her dreams, she still heard the chanting. Still felt the tentacles. Still saw the eye. And sometimes, when the tide came in, she'd find a locket on the beach. Inside, a photograph of her sister. And on the back, a single word, guilty. Lila woke in a hospital bed, the taste of salt and ash on her tongue. The nurses said she'd been found unconscious on the rocks, her body covered in symbols that glowed faintly in the dark. They'd scrubbed them off, but the marks lingered beneath her skin, a roadmap of the cave's secrets. Outside her window, Blackwater Cove churned, the waves roaring as if in warning. Detective Harris from Boston stood at her bedside, his face grim. "The mayor's dead," he said. "Drowned in his study. No signs of forced entry. Looks like suicide." He paused, studying her. "But the governor's office isn't buying it. They want answers about Margaret Voss. About the syndicate." Lila didn't speak. She couldn't explain the eye beneath the waves. The tentacles. The way the symbols on her skin pulsed when the tide rose. Mara's journal arrived by mail a week later, its pages brittle with age. Lila read it in the dim light of her rented cottage, the wind howling like a wounded animal. October 11, 1993. "They say the sea calls to certain people. I think I'm one of them. Last night, I followed the sound to the cliffs. There was a door, carved into the rock. A man in a suit let me in. He said they'd been waiting for me. That I was chosen. I don't know what that means. But the others, they're not like us. They're not human." October 12, 1993. "I'm not alone here. There are others like me. Girls who heard the call. But the syndicate, they're feeding us to something. Something in the dark. I'm scared, Lila. If you're reading this, find the lighthouse. Find the girl with no eyes." The final entry was a sketch, a spiral leading to a lighthouse, its beam pointing toward the caves. The lighthouse stood abandoned on the edge of Widow's Hill, its glass shattered, its walls covered in the same symbols that now lived beneath Lila's skin. She climbed the spiral staircase, her flashlight cutting through the dust. At the top, she found a journal wedged between rusted gears. It wasn't Mara's handwriting, it was older, filled with sketches of the cave, the syndicate's rituals, and a creature with tentacles and teeth. The final page read, "The bargain was struck in 1893. The sea demands a bride every decade. We thought we could control it. We were wrong." Back in town, Lila confronted Clara Reed, shoving the journal into her hands. "You knew," she said. "About the brides. The things in the water." Clara paled. "It wasn't supposed to be your sister. The sea chooses. We just deliver." That night, the town's sirens wailed. A body had washed ashore, Ethan Blake, his throat slit, a symbol carved into his chest. The same symbol Lila had seen in the lighthouse. The same one glowing on her arm. A storm rolled in, the worst in decades. Lila stood on the pier, the wind whipping her hair as the waves clawed at the shore. Old Maggie's words haunted her, "The tide's coming. She found Henry Cole at the docks, drunk and muttering about the old ways. "They're not done," he slurred. "The sea's hungry. And you're the only one who can stop it." "How?" Lila demanded. Henry pulled a rusted knife from his coat. "Blood," he said. "The bargain needs blood. Yours or theirs." Before she could react, he lunged. The knife grazed her arm, and the symbol on her skin flared to life, burning like a brand. Henry screamed, clutching his head as the symbol's glow intensified. "You're marked," he gasped. "The sea chose you too." Lila pieced it together in the chaos. The syndicate hadn't just killed girls, they'd been feeding them to the creature in the cave, a primordial thing that thrived on fear and sacrifice. Margaret had discovered the truth, traced the pattern of disappearances to the mayor's family. But the real horror wasn't the creature. It was the town itself. Blackwater Cove wasn't a place. It was a cage. The final clue came from Father O'Malley's confessional booth. Beneath the floorboards, Lila found a map of the tunnels, dotted with crosses marking burial sites. One cross was fresh, near the lighthouse. She dug through the storm, the rain blurring her vision, until her shovel hit wood. The coffin held a girl with no eyes, her hands clasped around a locket. Mara's locket. Inside was a photo of Lila, aged 16, and a note, "You were supposed to be next." The sea roared, the waves dragging Lila toward the cave. The symbols on her arm burned as she waded into the water, the creature's eye glowing in the depths. Tentacles wrapped around her legs, pulling her down. But this time, she was ready. Lila plunged the knife into her palm, blood swirling in the water. The creature recoiled, its scream echoing through the tunnels. "The bargain's broken," she whispered, her voice raw. "No more brides. No more lies." The cave trembled. The water receded, revealing the syndicate's bones, mayors, priests, fishermen, all entombed in coral. When Lila woke on the shore, the storm had passed. The town was silent. Blackwater Cove is gone now. Swallowed by the sea. They say the waves rose overnight, dragging the cliffs into the abyss. Lila survived, but her skin still bears the symbols. Sometimes, when the moon is full, she hears the chanting. And in Boston, a new mayor is elected. His campaign photo shows him standing beside a woman in a crimson dress. In 1893, Blackwater Cove was a whaling town on the brink of ruin. The sea had turned against them, boats returned empty, nets filled with bones. Desperate, the townsfolk turned to a stranger who arrived on a stormless night, Dr. Erasmus Voss, a physician with eyes like polished amber. He promised salvation in exchange for a gift. "The sea is hungry," he told the mayor. "Feed it, and it will provide." That night, they sacrificed an orphan girl named Lydia Crane, chaining her to the rocks as the tide rose. When the waves receded, Lydia was gone, and the whales returned. Erasmus Voss built his clinic on Widow's Hill, its windows blackened, its doors locked to all but the desperate. Women came with barren wombs, men with rotting limbs. Voss cured them, for a price. A lock of hair. A drop of blood. A promise whispered in the dark. But the true cost became clear when Lydia's mother, Margaret Crane, hanged herself in the town square, screaming about the thing beneath the waves. Her death marked the first of many. Lydia's sacrifice wasn't enough. The sea demanded more. In 1895, Erasmus Voss drowned his own wife, Eleanor, in a moonlit ritual, chaining her to the same rocks where Lydia had died. The town looked away. Eleanor's body washed ashore pregnant, a grotesque fetus with scales and teeth curled in her womb. Erasmus called it a miracle. The town called it a curse. When the creature's tentacles first breached the surface, the town built the lighthouse to ward it off. But Erasmus redrew the blueprints, carving symbols into the foundation, a language he'd learned from the sea. The lighthouse keeper, a reclusive man named Silas Morrow, reported hearing whispers in the stones. "They're not gone," he told the mayor. "They're waiting." Silas vanished the next day, his logbook filled with frantic scribbles. "It's inside us. The sea. The dark. It's hungry." By 1900, Erasmus Voss had fathered 7 children, each born with amber eyes and webbed fingers. He married them into powerful families, the Hargraves, the Coles, the Reeds, binding the town to his bloodline. The sacrifices grew more frequent. A fisherman's daughter here, a widow there. The syndicate, as they now called themselves, recorded each death in a leather-bound ledger, its pages stained with seawater and gilt. In 1903, Silas Morrow's grandson, Elias, discovered the ledger. He'd grown up hearing tales of the lighthouse's curse, but the names, Lydia, Eleanor, Mara, turned his blood to ice. Elias confronted Erasmus in the clinic, a revolver in his hand. "It ends here," he said. Erasmus smiled. "You're too late." He gestured to the window, where the sea churned black. "The brides are awake." Elias fired, but the bullet passed through Erasmus's chest, lodging in the wall. The doctor dissolved into seawater, his laughter echoing as the clinic flooded. The sea claimed Elias that night, his body found with symbols carved into his palms. The syndicate buried the truth, blaming his death on a fishing accident. But the townsfolk knew. They'd seen the lighthouse beam turn crimson, heard the bride's screams in the wind. By 1910, Blackwater Cove was a shrine to the sea, its churches filled with salt water, its children born with scales, its history rewritten. When Lila Grayson uncovers a faded daguerreotype of Erasmus Voss in the town archives, her blood runs cold. His face mirrors the mayor's. His eyes match the creature's. And in the background of the photo, a girl in a crimson dress stares at the camera. Her face a match for Margaret Voss, for Clara Reed, for the bride in the shipping container. The cycle isn't broken. It's only just begun. Lila fled to Boston, but the sea followed. It started with the dreams, a chorus of voices, the scrape of tentacles against her window. Then the symbols returned, etched into her skin like scars. She burned Mara's locket, but the guilt remained, a weight in her chest. Mayor Thomas Voss's replacement was a woman named Evelyn Hart, her smile sharp, her crimson dress a mirror of Margaret's. At her inauguration, she unveiled a statue of the town's founder, a man with tentacles for hair. "We honor our past," she said, "and embrace our future." That night, 3 fishermen vanished. Their bodies washed ashore with the same symbols carved into their flesh. Detective Harris cornered Lila in an alley, his badge glinting. "The governor wants this buried," he said. "But I know what you did. What you are." He slid a file across the pavement. Inside were photos of a shipping container in Boston Harbor, its doors sealed with the syndicate's mark. "The brides," Lila whispered. "The sea's moving north," Harris said. "And it's not alone." Lila returned to Blackwater Cove under the cover of darkness. The lighthouse ruins hummed with energy, its stones warm to the touch. Beneath the ashes, she found a hidden chamber, a shrine filled with jars of seawater, each labeled with a name: Sophie Marlowe, Mara Grayson, Clara Reed. A journal lay open, its pages filled with Clara's handwriting. "The brides aren't sacrifices. They're vessels. The sea uses them to climb onto land. And Lila, she's the key." Clara confronted her at gunpoint, her eyes wild. "You shouldn't have come back," she said. "The sea chose you for a reason. You're the only one who can free it. I won't let it take anyone else." Clara laughed. "It's too late. Look around you." The town's residents emerged from the shadows, their eyes glowing amber. The same color as the creatures. Lila stood at the cliffs, the symbols on her arm blazing. The sea roared, tentacles erupting from the waves. Evelyn Hart stood beside her, a dagger in hand. "You can't stop it," she said. "The syndicate is eternal." Lila plunged the knife into her own chest, her blood mixing with the salt water. The symbols erupted in light, searing the creature, the town, the very air. When the light faded, Blackwater Cove was gone, a crater of black glass where the town once stood. They found Lila's body on a Boston beach, her skin smooth, her face peaceful. The locket around her neck was empty. But in Blackwater Cove's crater, something stirs, a heartbeat beneath the glass, a whisper in the wind. And in Boston, a new shipping container arrives, its doors sealed with a symbol that glows in the dark.